How would you live your life if you thought you knew how it would end? Our guest today has a new book out that explores this very question.
Liane Moriarty is the author of the #1 New York Times bestsellers Big Little Lies, Apples Never Fall, The Husband's Secret, and Truly Madly Guilty. The New York Times bestsellers Nine Perfect Strangers, What Alice Forgot, and The Last Anniversary. The Hypnotist Love Story, and Three Wishes. She lives in Sydney, Australia with her husband, her son, and her daughter. Welcome to the first 50 pages, Liane.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
We are so excited to talk with you about your new book, Here One Moment. I just finished it a couple days ago and I'm still thinking about it, and I'm not just yet ready to move on to something new. And there's just so much to love about this book for me, including complex, emotionally layered characters, the complexities of family dynamics, humor, and an exploration of quite serious subjects, too. For readers who haven't heard about your new book yet, can you tell us a little bit about your new novel? What you'd like listeners to know about Here One Moment?
Yes, so it's a story of, it begins on a flight, an ordinary domestic flight out of Hobart in Tasmania, and Tasmania is the little island state at the bottom of Australia, which often gets left off maps, and or the Tasmanians get very cranky about that, rightly so. And it's a delayed flight, so it sits on the tarmac for quite a while, and then it finally takes off. 10 minutes or so before it's about to land in Sydney, a very unremarkable woman stands up and she counts herself in 1, 2, 3, and then she begins to point at every single passenger on the flight before she can be stopped, and she tells them their age of death and cause of death. And of course, some people don't take much notice. They, I think she has mental health issues or whatever. Some people feel a real chill. Most of them are passengers try to put it out of their minds until a few months after the flight, the first prediction comes true. And so the book then explores what happens in the months afterwards.
Can we talk about what inspired you to write this novel?
Yes, so I was on exactly that same flight. I spent a bit of time in Tasmania because my husband grew up there, and I had just spent a week there writing, and I, like the people on the flight, was stuck on the tarmac at a Hobart airport, and I did not have a book, which was a terrible error. Never travel without a book, and although it's good that I didn't have one in this case, because otherwise I wouldn't have come up with the idea for this novel.
Yeah.
Uh, and I was looking around at the other passengers as we were stuck there, and I was thinking about the fact that every single one of us was going to one day die. So that was the cheerful thought.
Right as before you're taken off.
That's right. Um, yeah, I'm not afraid of flying. I don't think it was anything to do with fear of flying. When I look back, I think it's not surprising that I was thinking about my own mortality at that time, because a few things had happened in the years leading up to that flight. So first of all, my sister was diagnosed with breast cancer. Then we lost our dad. Then we had the pandemic, and then I myself was diagnosed with breast cancer. And also, I think just being in my 50s at the time, I think it's just a time when more people in your circle start to receive serious diagnoses. And so that's why I was thinking. So, obviously, thinking about my own mortality, uh, and and I remember thinking, so every one of us is going to one day die. And I was thinking about the fact that at some point in the future, however many years, maybe 100 years, because there were some children on the flight, somebody would be able to look back and they would be able to look at the names of the passengers on that flight, and that information would be available, as in somebody would be able to look back and see, okay, this person died at the age of such and such from such and such. And it sort of blew my mind that that there was that was an absolute fact that those facts would be available. They just weren't available right now. And that's when I thought, imagine if somebody stood up and shared that information. Imagine if it was somehow available right now.
Well, and in your skilled hands, right, as a writer, the story is really just fantastic. And I loved the deaf lady, right, Cherry. And in the first few chapters, you don't because why would anyone do this, right? Until we get her story, her perspective, and then it's a very different kind of story. But I thought she was such a well-written character. Um, how did you approach writing her character?
Yeah, so the character of Cherry, I didn't know in the beginning of the book, or when I first came up with the premise, I didn't know who she was, and in fact, I was ready to discard the whole idea until I worked out who she could be. So I just knew that I knew what she did, and sort of knew who she was, but I didn't know anything about her personality. So it's a little tricky to talk about without giving things away.
Yeah, sure.
But through the process of research, I then her personality sort of developed as I wrote her, and in the same way that that readers talk about how they didn't like her much in the beginning, and then they were very fond of her by the end. That's exactly how I felt, as I got to know her through the process of writing her. By the end, I loved her, um, and I was also saying, like, part of the reason for my affection for her is that I gave her my mother's childhood,
Oh,
and also my godmother. So my mother and her best friend who grew up on the same street together, they both wrote. They just decided to write little stories of their lives with little anecdotes, and they had them printed up. And so, yeah, reading their um, miniature memoirs was wonderful for me to use some of their stories.
as I'm reading Here One Moment, I was looking on social media. I'm not sure if you know who Adam Grant is. He is an author and an organizational psychologist.
Oh yes, yes,
Yeah.
I do. Yeah.
And he had posted about his new favorite word, which was from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows by John Koenig, Sonder, Sonder. And Adam Grant posted, Sonder is the profound awareness that every person you encounter has experienced a lifetime of hopes, fears, loves, and heartaches that you'll never know. Every moment of Sonder is a reminder to appreciate how little we truly grasp about others' lives. And I was like, this just fits with this book so well. But
It does, and it's really that's something lovely to remember, especially when you come across some really unappealing people, isn't it? You try to keep that in your mind. There are some people who I still hold grudges against, just little strangers who are nasty to you on planes, just thinking, yes, what happened to you? I still don't forgive them though. I'm trying to use that phrase to help me forgive them. It's lovely though.
yeah, so I have to ask, have you ever had an accidental encounter with a clairvoyant?
Not I have never had an accidental, encounter. I've had, some planned encounters. Oh, well, I remember once being at, a charity event where they had psychics there sitting at tables, and I went and sat down with him, and I clearly remember because, I was at a time in my life where I was single. Excuse me, I was single, uh, and all my friends were having babies, and I was desperate to know if I would have children one day.
Mhm.
And I asked him that, and I can always remember he looked up at me and he met my eyes, and it was like he sort of gave up on his performance, and he said, "Oh, of course you will, darling." And it was just like it was more the way a nice person on a bus would say that to you. I just really felt like he was saying, "Don't worry about it." Um, Having said that, I did have children. He was right. So perhaps he was a genuine clairvoyant. It was just something about the way he looked at me that made me think he was saying, don't worry." Um, and then I did for research for this one, I saw a psychic who I was recommended to, and she read my cards. Um, but I could tell as soon as I walked into that room that she'd clocked me and that she'd thought, "Oh, okay, I've got this one. She's a middle-aged woman and her children have just left home and thinking, 'What's next for me?'" Uh, and actually I had my children late, so, my children were still very much at home, and so she was saying to me, "So you're thinking everything's always been about other people, but now you're thinking, what about me? It's time for something for me." And I was thinking, oh, so it's always been about me, really. That's not the case. And then she said, she was obviously trying to look for more information to give us some hints. And so she said, "What do you do for a living?" And I said, "I'm an author." And so she said, quite doubtfully, she said, "Well, I think you should do quite well with that. But maybe change how you're marketing your books. Maybe you could think about putting them on eBay or something like that." And and so I sort of, I have laughed at this, but it is interesting that at one of my events, a woman came up to me and she had an hard cover copy of Three Wishes, which is my first novel. And she said she had to go to so much trouble to find this book. And guess where she found it? On eBay.
eBay. Yes.
Then you could say that her prediction did come true.
Well, I am going to guess that readers are probably going to be sharing their own psychic encounters with you pretty regularly now. Uh,
Yes, and I love hearing people's stories, because I'm a skeptic, but I'm desperate to believe. Um, and people do well, having said that, somebody told me that her aunt was told she would die at the age of, I think it was 40 something, and the poor aunt spent all the years up until the age of her predicted death worrying about it, and then went on to live until she was 80. So it was just a reminder that what my woman does on that flight is a terribly cruel thing to do to somebody.
and our, an interesting tie-in for us in reading this book was our community just recently lost a local psychic, and she kind of had a bit of mythology around her, and you would be hard pressed to find someone in our community who didn't know about her or know someone that she had given a reading to, including me. I had an accidental encounter with her 30
Did
years
you?
I did 30 years ago. I worked at a grocery store the summer before I left for college. And I ended up being her checker, and she said to me, "Do you know who I am?" And I didn't know who she was. She said, "Well, I don't know that I wanna use her name, but she said who she was, and then she told me not to be in a hurry to get married, and then she gave me some other cryptic clues." I can remember what I was wearing that day, right? Like,
Yes.
the memory just sort of, seared in my mind. And I've shared that story with people over the years, and, you kind of understand the mythology because maybe part of the prediction was right for some people and maybe it wasn't, but I find that
And
I find it all very fascinating, and I think that in Here One Moment, you capture that brilliantly, that we really see the humanity in the characters of your book by how their predictions affect them. I j
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what's so interest so what I'm interested in is, did you change your life in some way as a result of what she said to you?
Well, um, I was engaged when I was in college, and I broke it off.
You did?
So, but yeah, I don't know. So did I do it no, I don't know. I don't know that I did
Do
it
it not
because of
yeah.
her, but, you know, it always sat in the back of my mind, like, this is maybe not the path I need to be on, but yeah, um,
That's
yeah,
what I find it also fascinating and exactly what, yes, I wanted to explore in the book because there are so many parts to it. There's the fact that if she's talking to a young girl at the checkout, then chances are most beautiful young women will probably have some man in their lives who they should not marry. I think that the chances are high
yeah,
of that. So there's that. Then there's the fact that, did you change your behavior in some way as a result of it, therefore making the destiny come true? Or did she really have some special abilities, which I think could be true. So
yeah.
that's what, yeah, I find the maths of it interesting, the statistical probability that she could have got that right, and also the possibility that some people really do have gifts. Yeah, and that there's so much more about the world that we don't understand.
Yeah. We wanna definitely respect your time. I think we could sit and chat with you for so long. I think so we're gonna jump ahead a little bit.
Of
Um,
course.
So there's a very interesting back and forth on the concepts of determinism versus free will in this story and like the idea of fate. Was there any one thing that stood out in your research for the book that you found especially intriguing?
Um, Let me think. I was just exploring along with Cherry as I wrote the book, and I found it all fascinating. I guess um, just the way that we naturally want to see patterns in life. Um, and the fact that, the a story that she tells about her father explaining to her that the coin has no memory, um, and so that every time you toss a coin, it's got an equal chance of being tails or heads. And I understand the maths of that, uh, but I also can't quite believe it either, because like everybody, I think if you see um, three heads in a row, then you think the next one will surely be tails. And I do, and also I think I wrote about the fair, or what was it called, the fair world fallacy, um, which
there
was
were so many good ones, right? There were so many little, like, added the scientific sort of things added into, the theories to the book.
But it made you want to jump off in these rabbit holes of like, okay, I got to put my bookmark in the book, and then I'm going to have to go down this online research rabbit hole.
because I think we all do that. Yes, the fair world, that you think that if this has gone wrong, well, then it's not fair. Then now I will get some good luck. And of course, it doesn't work that way. But I find that in a way comforting to
Yeah.
just think whatever's happening, it's nobody's actually up there saying we're going to make everything go wrong for you today. It just feels like that.
Right?
Early on in the book, you discuss Cherry and that dinner party that she went to back in 1984, and that, she really wanted to, ask a question of the bearded man at that dinner. And she wanted to ask, if free will doesn't exist, if all your decisions and actions are inevitable, are you still required to apologize for them? And I still keep thinking about that possible question. I'm like, oh, she should have asked it. Like, I want to know. Yes, sir.
Well, and I think she didn't really respect him. She knows the answer herself that,
Yeah.
of course she should apologize for them.
Yeah. But I kind of wanted her to just be like unapologetic about it. I'm just like, eh. On a little bit more serious note, one of the main themes of Here One Moment is confronting mortality. Death and dying is a subject that we so often avoid at all costs. And I think that in reading this book, through the way the story is crafted, you create a space for dialogue on mortality. With sharp wit and a nuanced eye on human relationships, you really help to make the discussion accessible. How do you know when that quote unquote humor strikes the right chord in your writing?
Um, do I yes, do I don't know if I do know, and I'm always questioning myself and even, uh, uh, I feel like when you're saying lovely things about it that it has, but then I can read something else that says that I haven't, that I haven't done so. So I don't know. And I find when I'm writing, I just have to focus on the story, and that it's really important that that's all I focus on. And if other things emerge, if themes emerge, then that's wonderful. But I shouldn't try to make them emerge.
And I do your books, and not just this one, but so many of them have that balance of, seriousness, serious subjects, and wit and keen observation. That's what makes them so fun to read for me, I think.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah, and that's what I think what I've struggled to accept is that of course, some people will say they're too light, or why did she go off on that? I'm not interested in the coin tossing. I wanted to just go into the thriller side of it. Um, and I irrationally think one day I will get it exactly right. One day I will get it so everybody, loves it. Um, so that's an interest. There's probably some phrase, some author's fallacy, but author fallacy that I am suffering from.
Well, I think that kind of ties perfectly into my next question for you. As librarians, we're keenly aware that each reader has a different experience reading a book. Each bring our own life experiences to our reading, our understanding, and even, retelling a story. Having sold over 20 million copies of your books worldwide, what are your thoughts on how your books have been interpreted by readers? And do you find the same stories emerge in the way that your books have impacted them?
Um, yes, well, I've come to realize exactly as you say that every single reader has a slightly different experience of reading it, which is why I always say it's when people say, "Oh, I hope they don't spoil your book when they're doing an adaptation," or "I hope they don't change your book." And I always think, but it's so interesting because every reader has a slightly different experience of reading it, and I know that because they come to me and sometimes they say they're talking about something in the book and they've got it just a tiny bit wrong. And I know because I wrote the book, but it's wrong as in they've added something from their own life. So if there's a particular beach, for example, then they start describing it, but it's clearly a beach that they went to. So I love that everybody's imagination changes it slightly. So it's my imagination working together with their imagination and creating all these different experiences. But yet, every reader, so some readers, depending on what's happening in their own life, will have something different. So, if, for example, they recently experienced a loss when they're reading this book, they might really have quite a profound experience reading it, whereas another reader might take it on a beach holiday and they just want to read it like a thriller and say, "So, what happened? Who was she?" And they're just flipping the pages quickly. Um, and that's okay. Whatever they take from it is fine. There was one woman who came up to me, excuse me, after an event, and she had one of my previous books, and she was started to tell me the story of how she read this book when her child was very sick and in intensive care. And she said to me, and it was just so good when I was going through all this stress, and then, excuse me, I knew I could go back to the waiting room and just lose myself in my
Yeah.
crappy book. Um, and that's so funny because she walked off, and I thought, I bet she's thinking to herself, did I just tell that author that she wrote crappy book? I knew what she meant. What she meant was that the book wasn't, she was going through important real life things, and she was going to lose herself in a book that,
Yeah.
it's just a story. And I'm honestly really honored that I helped her get through that time. So whether it's a crappy book that gets you through a hard time, or a profound book that teaches you uh, some sort of life lesson that you take with you forever. Either way, it's wonderful.
And we have talked before, we love to talk about the power of story in people's lives and how reading can transport you. And we also know that people judge themselves for what they read. So if you're not reading highbrow literary canon works, then you probably are saying, well, it's just a novel. But we read for joy. We love that phrase.
Yes,
Read it
and
makes you happy.
read for pleasure. I think it's something that left over from your school days, where you thought reading should not be fun. And it's fun, when people say to me, "What's your guilty pleasure for reading?" And I always think, well, I'm not going to feel guilty
Right.
about reading anything ever.
So yes, obviously, it's quite evident to us that you are a reader. And so if you have a few minutes to talk about what sparked the love of books for you in your life, was it a specific book or a person that gifted that to you, or was it something that you discovered on your own?
Well, so I did grow up in a house where books were always available, which was something I took for granted for quite a long time. My grandmother had uh, bookshelves filled with all the books that she loved, which was a lot of English books. So they were set in boarding schools and things like that. And then my father had a home office where he had a lot of airport sort of thrillers there. And so I read some books much too early when I was very little. Um, and then my mother would take us to the library, but it was just something to distract us, to keep her, to keep us going. Because I'm the eldest of 6, so anything that would keep us quiet, she definitely was not doing it in the way that we do now, where we think we're doing something good for our children. "Please, please, you must read." It was just anything to shut you up. Um, so and I can't remember a particular book. I just loved it from when I was very young.
And Here One Moment has found praise already with readers and critics alike. High praise from Publishers Weekly, and Kirkus Starred Review ends with a fresh, funny, ambitious, and nuanced take on some of our oldest existential questions. Cannot wait for the TV series. And so we would be leaving out something very special from this conversation if we didn't mention that you've worked with some of the most talented A-list actors and actresses that have brought adaptations of your books to life on screen, including one of my favorites, Big Little Lies, which did win multiple Emmys. And we just saw an article that you are working on a sequel to Big Little Lies. Are there any details yet that you can share about the sequel?
And that it's about, so when I first wrote the book, my children were very little, and so the story is about, 3 mothers and their children are all starting kindergarten. So now my children are in their teens, and so, they're providing a lot of teen material. So I'm writing a sequel with all the same characters except the children are now teenagers, and of course, the issues that they're dealing with are therefore, so much more, complicated. Even though when your children are little, you think it could not get any harder than this. And I remember the people saying, I can remember my own mother saying, "It gets harder," and of course it does. She was right.
So I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say that I have to imagine that book is also going to debut at #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list. So here, this is the first statement of that happening. We're going to manifest this.
Yeah. I really hope you have psychic abilities.
I hope I do too. The one and only time it will be for this. We
Bless you so much. You know that because now after this, I've got to go back to writing the sequel and hearing things like that. And honestly, it really gives me the motivation to keep writing. So thank you.
Well, really, it's a pleasure for us, and we're just a few of your many, many fans out there. Thank you for joining us today, Liane. It's been a fun chat, and we wish you the best with all of your exciting projects sure to come.
Oh, thank you. It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you to you both.